get wiped out with that song, and then I'm looking at Omil and Dana because, as you know, if you want to put your papers down, I promised you last week that we would hear their story, and I told you last week if you weren't here, they have made me a better person for what they've gone through. We've been through this for a little over 2 years together, and they came in. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder. They walked in here, and part of my sermon was a story on law and order, and they didn't leave. I gave them plenty of time, so let them speak. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry. Omil, yes, and I got this one.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Lord be with you.
They used to be John and Jane on our prayer list.
We were Juan and Jane from Puerto Rico. If I get a little emotional, I'm sorry. It's my way of letting go of a 2.5-year nightmare that my family and I experienced. So if I pass out or anything, Jane will take over. It was at the worst time of our life that God spoke the loudest. 2.5 years ago, I was accused of a crime I did not commit and faced 33 years in state prison if convicted. It breaks your spirit. It leaves you powerless. Everyone you love suffers even more than you because all they can do is stand and watch. But even then, God was with us. I was arrested on September 24th, 2014 and arraigned the next day, where my lawyer at the time entered a not guilty plea. I was then sent to Rikers Island until my family could come up with the bail money. My wife, my uncle, my mother, my mother-in-law, my niece pregnant at the time, and her fiance Louis rushed to the court to get the documents needed to get me out. My son Aaron, you guys know Aaron, he didn't know where mom and dad were for 5 to 6 days or why he could not come home anymore. For 5 days he worried. I gotta man up. Staying at different places under the care of my sister-in-law Cara, not knowing why this was happening to him. Meanwhile, in Rikers Island, the housing unit I was in was calm in the day, but it was hell at night. A young Dominican I befriended told me he was beat up over his commissary. That's your snacks and your food. I was on the news, and the inmates were curious about who I was. It was only a matter of time before I'd have to fight to protect myself. But I tell you, God was with me. I was safe in a housing unit surrounded by bloods. But God protected me. The corrections officers were very respectful and very professional, and even they told me, fight the case. Once released, we headed to a family member's place. For the next 2.5 years, we used her living room as our bedroom and her sofa as a bed. We were very fortunate that she lived 5 minutes away. This poor woman worked 2 jobs, gave us all that she could to keep us together, tried her best to give Aaron a normal life. Come to think of it, so many friends and family members believed in us and helped us. And come to think of it, many turned their back on us. But you gotta learn to forgive, and we forgive and we move on. By the time I made bail, I had been on the news for a week. The bail was at first $50,000 and then was raised by another $200,000 more. I couldn't believe how many family members stepped up with collateral to post bond. Their sacrifice helped so much, because I read an article about the prosecution and a tactic they use known as bleed 'em and plead 'em, meaning they keep you rotting in jail in the worst possible place they could put you in, knowing you'll be in danger. And then they offer you a plea for a fraction of your sentence. Cases like mine had a high conviction rate because of guilty pleas. Believe it or not, guys, Google led me to this church, led us to this church. The worst thing that ever happened to me had now given me the opportunity to find God. At the time, my sister-in-law was going through a dark time herself, and so we attended the service together. I was a miserable wretch, but I found peace and happiness here. My third time attending, I remember sitting in the pew by the stained glass window, that third window, the second window there, actually, when Pastor Raggie started a sermon by describing a trial. It was a scene out of Law and Order. You could hear a pin drop when this beautiful, wonderful woman spoke. You were accused of a crime. You had your trial, and now the jury deliberated. The verdict is in. The jury enters. You're anxious. You're nervous. Jurors, have you reached a verdict? Yes. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. My sister-in-law looked at each other almost in tears. Could she be talking about you? I don't think she wasn't, but she was describing the feeling when God relieves us of our burden, the feeling of true freedom. And I was able to experience both. So maybe in a way she was. My first impression of Tony, my attorney, was that he was detached and indifferent. He had little faith in God and cared more about retainers and legal fees. He asked me one day to write my autobiography so he could get to know me better. I wrote it, dropped it off, and went to our house to continue our emergency move. You see, there was a news photographer parked in the back waiting to take pictures, and the media had reported from the front of the house. We could no longer afford to live there. The only thing sustaining us was Dana's part-time job at Home Depot. We didn't even know how we were going to survive at the time. In the middle of packing up the life we once knew into a moving truck, my attorney called. He called to say that he was moved by my life story and offered me a job as a paralegal. His kindness gave us so much hope. Standing in the sunroom on the last day of my life as I knew it, in the place I once called home, we hugged as a family, weeping and thanking God for that blessing. Then I was arraigned a second time. The DA added more charges. How can they get away with lying? I didn't even recognize the names of my accusers. Over casual sips of coffee, he told me he wanted more money we didn't have. My case was a high-profile case in the Brooklyn Supreme Court. Other attorneys either didn't have the experience or they cared more about money. I felt lost without Tony, and we prayed that God see into this man's heart. Prayed that he could see past the money. He was already getting $90,000 to represent us. Everything else we had was tied up in bail. Days later, I really feel God spoke into this man's heart. He just came over and said, I won't leave you, O. I won't abandon you. I'll do it for the $90,000. I ran over, hugged him, and thanked him. As time passed, he would become a friend. Sometimes the kind of friend you want to punch, but a friend nonetheless. This man worked tirelessly, preparing for trial. He barely slept. I worked with him. We worked on opening and closing arguments. We did legal research together. We found witnesses. We looked through all the evidence. We grew close. And in the middle of preparing one day, he stopped typing and looked at me. On the outside, this man looked the way I felt on the inside. He said, oh, I believe in you. As bad as you need to win this, I need to win this. I can't let an innocent man go to prison. Now days became weeks and time blurs into bouts of anxiety and depression. I barely slept. My poor Dana deteriorated physically and emotionally. I also noticed, though, that through all this suffering, she was becoming more and more faithful as time went on. We brought home the church programs. We read the notes. We sang the songs in the car. Every time she prayed, she saw a seagull, and we took it as a sign that God was with us, to reassure us a little bit. We felt peace only in church and during family get-togethers. It was so difficult to appear normal in front of you guys, hiding this secret from fear of judgment. In the light, we smiled and we joked, but when no one was around, we cried for 2.5 years. We found out one day that year into the charges that one of my accusers was already suing. There wasn't even a trial yet. There was no disposition of any kind of my case. Did this girl and her family really want justice? Two other accusers used the charges to get a green card, among other benefits. Me and Dana used to say, if it was my son, I'd be in every court date, staring this guy down. I wouldn't want benefits. Thinking about it now, I prayed and cried so much while parked outside of the Coram post office. I walked in to mail a response to my civil suit. The postal employee processed the mail, and as he did, he just looked up out of the blue and said, whatever it is you're going through, I hope that it gets resolved. God is with you, like in the one set of footprints in the sand. He doesn't just leave us in the valley of the shadow. He helps us walk through it. This is just a trial. You'll get through it. This man did not know me or my family. By then, I was old news in the media. He only looked at the envelopes and was moved to speak. He'll never know this, but he saved me. He strengthened my faith. I felt like he gave me a glass of water in the middle of the desert. My niece had a similar conversation with a lady at a bodega, and Dana with a person on the phone who had served 15 years in prison. So now months turned to years. Everyone moved on with their lives, so we were stuck in the same place. We were very down and low, and I remember, and I really feel, that God spoke to us through the scene in the movie. It inspired us to keep going. It said, even when God seemed to have abandoned us, he was watching. Even when he seemed indifferent to our suffering, he was watching. And when we were beyond all hope of saving, he gave us rest. Then he gave me a sign to continue my journey. That was our journey of faith. Our journey of faith was a dark moment used for God's purpose in his time and in his way. When we needed more money to complete the legal fees, we were miraculously approved for a loan, despite the fact that by that time, all I had was a Home Depot part-time job and a credit score in the lower 600s. My niece and Dana, who were denied loans themselves, had to co-sign. Out of the blue, my old job called to tell me they owed me $2,000 for unpaid sick days. My retirement, apparently I had retirement money, and it was used to process the second bill. And this wonderful church, all of you sitting here right now, helped us without even knowing. Your smiles and your friendship. Your smiles, your friendship, and your acceptance moved us. When we couldn't afford any food, your food pantry fed us. During hard times, you donated a Christmas tree and the ornaments. You gave my son school supplies for school. You taught him to believe in God, the most important lesson ever. During the trial, he prayed every day that Dad could come home forever. He prayed that one day he could return to his house. He's very prayerful and faithful, and it's because you guys taught him that. At the EVA trial, the DA decided to drop the charges for 4 of my accusers and 13 counts in a 22-count indictment. It sounded like a blessing, but in reality, she removed what we believe were the ringleaders from the charges. One of them even admitted that she and other girls made up lies to try to get me fired. The DA knew I was innocent, but she cared more about winning. This was not about justice or truth. Mary Lou said, Mary Lou was there, a lot of you were there, and I'm so grateful for it. Mary Lou said that my lawyer was interrupted, I believe she said 35 times in one day, while presenting his defense for me. Every objection against him was sustained. The 7 objections my attorney made against the prosecution were overruled. He declared my case a mistrial over 6 times. So on the first day of trial, the judge let it be known that she was going to seek the maximum sentence if I was found guilty, meaning at the very least 30 years or more. She then limited the defense. That meant that we could not call any witnesses in our behalf. Evidence in our favor was now inadmissible. A witness flew in from Washington State to speak on my behalf, and the judge wouldn't see her. We couldn't even mention the names of the ringleaders except for one. Our whole defense was pulled out from under us. My lawyer, my defender, the man I put in charge of my freedom, then vigorously convinced me to take a plea, a guilty plea, that would have me register as a sex offender and do 6 months in Rikers. But then 6 months turned to 5 years. From day one, the DA tried several offers. She tried 30 days in jail, no registry. She tried jail, no jail with a felony, 30 days in jail. And even my lawyer tried to convince us at one point, at the onset of the trial, to take a plea. He and the people of his office believed in my innocence, but they admitted to me that they were scared, and if they were in my shoes, they would take the plea. My attorney's reasoning was that the plea could save his innocent client from doing 10 to 35 years. He believed it was the type of case that jurors find difficult to be fair in. He was an intense man, but he was now frantic. They gave me an hour to decide, and I agreed to take the plea. My family saw that I pled guilty. The judge kept repeatedly asking, "Is this really what you want to do, Mr. Carrasquillo? There's no coming back from this." I remember looking above her head, and there's a sign right above her head, and it said, "In God we trust." Do it. My lawyer stared at me and said it. Do it. Sign the paper. I was within an inch from signing the final document when I started feeling nauseous and angry. My heart started beating really, really fast. I shook my head, and I felt my heart speaking to me. And it said, "No, no." I couldn't get up and admit to something I didn't do, especially something as disgusting as those allegations. I looked at my family. It was like watching a funeral from the coffin. My wife, between sobs, said, "The truth will set you free." I turned around and told the judge, "I withdraw my plea. I'm innocent. I'm not guilty, and I want to fight this." The night before I went on the stand, I prayed for protection, that God speak through me, that the district attorney's traps fall apart. My sister suggested reading Psalm 35. During direct examination, all the fear went away. I was able to be heard for the first time in 2.5 years, and I professed my innocence to the jury. But during cross-examination, I felt so angry at the district attorney. I became combative. In the middle of my testimony, the judge stopped everything and released us for lunch. Now, you guys watch Law and Order. You know, that never happens. They were even read to commercials when it's the accused on the stand. Pastor, Mary Beth, Barbara, Mary Lou, and my family prayed over me. I tried to let go of anger. We had lunch, we laughed a little, and came back. Louis, my niece's fiance, told me something I'll never forget. Now I'm going to try to do his little accent. He's from the Bronx. He said, "My man, you got the truth on your side. Just relax and answer the questions." And you know what? Like, a wave of relaxation came over me. When I came back on the stand, I was a different person. It was calm. I felt peace. I kept looking over. I saw my church family. I saw my family. And I felt good. And no matter how much this woman tried to trip me up, they fell flat on their face. Her lies were so great that she based her evidence on incorrect photos. And the jury got to see that. When my accusers and their parents took the stand, it was clear they were regurgitating rehearsed answers. One of them even admitted that she was told by the district attorney what to say, and that she practiced with her over 7 times. There were way too many inconsistencies in their stories, especially on the cross-examination. Even their parents admitted that I was respectable, and they refused to believe their own children. Louis, the Bronx guy, later on he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, "I'm not very religious, but I felt a presence in that courtroom. I can't explain it. But there's been way too many coincidences in your case to make me think that what was going on really was a coincidence. I think what happened is that God was there. God was really with us. The night before the verdict, I prayed. Picture, guys, you're walking on a tightrope between 2 skyscrapers. How hard would you pray? Right? My sister told me that in her journey of faith, she prayed that God help her do what was needed to be released from her suffering. So that night I asked God, is there something I haven't done yet? Is there something you want me to do? Just tell me. Tell me, Lord, tell me, please, I'll do it. At 5 a.m. the next day, I woke up in a cold sweat. I had a dream that I was in a dark room, and there was an object in the center of the room. And it spoke, but it didn't speak through a voice. It spoke through my heart. And the object said, faith, faith. And I realized that all God wanted me was to believe in him. So you can pray and sing the songs, but you have to believe that God is with you, especially in those times of need. God is with you and God will answer. Just like the lady who touched the robe of Jesus. Just like the time Jesus calmed the storm. Those were images I kept in my head to help me get through every night. The day of the verdict. My niece, my mother, my wife, and my cousin sat lost in thought as I prayed by the window. I prayed for God's presence in the courtroom and in the jury room. I thanked him for that moment and I prayed for my family. See, that morning, there was doubt in my head. I remember Pastor bringing it up that inside of us sometimes there's two forces, and you can go with one, which is not good, or the other, which is good, God's presence. And it was like negotiation in my head. What about one count in a year in Rikers? It's just Rikers. What about 2 counts? A year and a half in Rikers. And every time I